Alien Noble bet his own wife on the injured human losing. Imagine his face when he won. The grandest arena in the galaxy stood under the twin suns of the planet Chiron, filled with a mix of alien species. These were creatures from all over the universe: humans, Zalathians, Draconids, and more gathered for the most anticipated event in the cosmos, the gladiatorial combat of the noble houses. It was an arena of blood, sweat, and roaring crowds, where lives were gambled and the weak were crushed under the might of the strong. Lord Varanth of House Silarth, an alien noble with a reputation for cruelty, stood in the royal box, his sharp eyes gleaming with confidence. House Silarth was known for its wealth and power, but Varanth himself was most notorious for his arrogance and love of the arena. He saw himself as superior to all others, especially humans. To him, humans were weak, fragile, and unworthy of respect. Today, he had made a bet. A bet that he was sure he would win, and one that would make him laugh for years to come. He was betting against a human, one who had been injured during his previous fight. This human, a soldier named John, was a broken man, barely able to stand. His wounds were severe, and Varanth knew that the odds of him surviving another fight were next to nothing. But the real gamble was not on the human's life. It was on something much more personal. Varanth had bet his most prized possession, his wife, Lady Zira. He didn't believe the human could win, and he thought this would be an easy victory. The human would die, and Lady Zira would remain at his side, dutiful and loyal, just as she always had been. Lady Zira, sitting beside her husband in the royal box, was a beautiful woman, tall and elegant with dark hair and eyes that shone like the stars. But she was not as loyal as Varanth believed. In truth, she had grown tired of him. Tired of his arrogance, his cruelty, and his belief that he was untouchable. She had seen enough of his mistreatment of the human race to know that her husband had no respect for anything but his own ego. As the crowd roared and the arena gates opened, Varanth leaned back in his seat, grinning. His bet was secure. The human, barely standing, would be torn apart by his opponent, a monstrous alien named Grolt. Grolt was a beast, larger than most, with thick scaled skin and muscles that bulged like twisted steel. He was a gladiator of legend, known for his strength and brutality. He had never lost a fight. Varanth's voice was calm, his confidence unwavering. Grolt will break that human in minutes. No one survives a fight like this. He spoke loud enough for Lady Zira to hear, as if to remind her that his victory was inevitable. But Lady Zira said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the human, her thoughts far away. She had traveled across the galaxy, and in her travels she had seen the strength of humanity. They were survivors, no matter the odds, but she knew she couldn't tell Varanth that. He would never understand. The human, John, stood shakily in the center of the arena, blood dripping from his body. His armor was damaged, and his face was covered in dirt and sweat. He looked like a man who had already given up, someone who had fought too many battles and lost too much. The crowd jeered, shouting insults and mocking him. To them, he was just another pawn in their game. As the bell rang, signaling the start of the fight, Grolt let out a loud roar and charged at John with the speed of a thunderstorm. The crowd gasped in excitement, ready for the spectacle. John barely had time to lift his weapon, a small, crude sword he had been given just before the fight. Varanth chuckled to himself, watching with amusement. This will be over soon. But what happened next surprised everyone. John, despite his injuries, sidestepped just in time. Grolt, unable to stop his momentum, crashed into the ground with a loud thud. The crowd fell silent for a moment, confused. Varanth blinked. What? John didn't waste any time. He staggered to his feet, still holding his sword, and aimed it at Grolt, who was now struggling to rise. The human's movements were slow, each step painful, but he refused to give up. His eyes locked onto Grolt with a determination that seemed impossible for someone in his condition. For a moment, Grolt hesitated, taken aback by the human's bravery. Then, with a snarl, he lunged again. This time, John was ready. He dodged to the side, using his small weapon to strike at Grolt's exposed side. The blow was weak, but it drew blood. The crowd gasped. No one had expected this. Varanth's grin faltered. He had thought this fight would be a formality, but now, with each passing second, he saw the human's fighting spirit. Despite everything, his wounds, the odds, and the impossibly powerful opponent, John was not backing down. Lady Zira's heart raced. She had seen strength in humans before, but this was something else. It was as if John was fighting for something more than just survival. He was fighting for his dignity. And maybe, just maybe, he was fighting for the respect of those who had underestimated him. The fight raged on, with Grolt growing more frustrated with every move the human made. Each time Grolt tried to land a crushing blow, John managed to evade it, using his agility and wit to stay one step ahead. The human's movements were unpredictable, and Grolt, for all his size and power, was struggling to keep up. John's sword flashed again, this time catching Grolt's shoulder. The alien howled in pain, his massive form swaying unsteadily. For the first time in the fight, Grolt seemed unsure. Varanth's hand clenched around the armrest of his seat. He could feel the tide turning. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Lady Zira stood up, her eyes fixed on the human. A strange feeling stirred within her. She had never seen anyone fight like this before, not with such raw determination, not with the will to survive, no matter the cost. Grolt charged once more, but this time John was ready. He sidestepped, using the momentum of the larger alien's attack to twist his sword deep into Grolt's side. The crowd gasped as the monstrous gladiator staggered back, roaring in agony. It was over. John had done the impossible. The arena erupted into cheers, but Varanth was silent, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had lost. The human had won. The arena was alive with the roar of the crowd. The once boisterous cheers for the towering alien Grolt had turned into stunned silence. No one could believe what they had just seen. The human, a soldier named John, had done the impossible. He had wounded the great gladiator Grolt with a skill and determination that no one, especially the nobles, had expected. Lord Varanth of House Sillarth, who had been so sure of his victory, now stood frozen in disbelief. His jaw was clenched tight, and his hand was still gripping the armrest of his seat. The bet he had placed, the one that had seemed like an absolute guarantee, was slipping through his fingers. His eyes darted from John to Lady Zira, his wife, who stood beside him in a mixture of shock and something else. Was it admiration? For a moment, Varanth couldn't understand it. The once proud Lord of Sillarth had wagered his wife's freedom on the certainty that this human, weak, injured, barely able to stand, would fall quickly to Grolt's might. Now his confidence was fading as he watched the human rise, still holding onto his sword, still standing. The crowd was beginning to chant John's name, their voices growing louder with each passing second. John, John, John. But the human wasn't done yet. Grolt, shaking off the shock of the wound, roared in pain and fury. The massive alien warrior's body trembled with the effort to regain control. He was wounded, but his anger gave him new strength. He charged once more, faster this time, his fists swinging with the force of a crashing meteor. John, though exhausted and injured, stood firm. His heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't back away. His mind raced as he watched Grolt close in, his opponent's hulking form moving like a storm. John's breath came in short bursts, pain pulsing through his side with every movement, but he refused to show weakness. Not now. John knew that this was the moment. He had no chance in a fair fight against the alien's raw power, but he had something else, his mind. He could think faster, react quicker. That was his only advantage. Grolt's fist flew at him like a sledgehammer, but John ducked under it just in time. He felt the wind from the punch whip past his face. In one swift motion, he turned and brought his sword down in a low arc, slicing into Grolt's leg. The alien grunted in pain, but instead of retreating, he swung his massive arm, aiming to crush John beneath his strength. John had no choice but to roll away, his body screaming in protest from the pain of his injuries. The dust of the arena floor kicked up as he tumbled to his feet. The crowd gasped in shock, unsure of who would come out on top. Varanth, his face pale, clenched his fists tightly. "Impossible," Varanth muttered under his breath. His thoughts raced, but he could hardly process them. The human, this weak, injured human, was doing the unthinkable. Lady Zira, standing by her husband, watched intently. She could feel the shift in the air. There was a fire in John's eyes, a flame of determination that she hadn't expected to see. She knew that humans were resilient, but this was something more. John wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something deeper, something more powerful. He was fighting for his people. The human soldier dodged another of Grolt's attacks and slid under his opponent's legs, using the alien's size against him. Grolt spun around, but by then, John was already behind him. In one motion, he drove his sword deep into the alien's side, narrowly avoiding Grolt's swinging arm. The crowd went silent again, shocked by the sudden turn of events. Lord Varanth's face twisted with anger. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had placed his bet, confident that the human would fall. Now, everything was in jeopardy. "Finish him," shouted someone from the crowd. But John knew better than to follow the simple commands of the arena's bloodthirsty spectators. He could feel his strength slipping, and every movement took more effort. Grolt, though weakened, was still a giant, still powerful and still dangerous. If John didn't end this fight soon, Grolt would find a way to strike back. John's sword was slick with the alien's blood, but he couldn't afford to pause. He had to keep moving, keep dodging, and keep pressing the attack. With one last burst of energy, John leaped at Grolt, avoiding a devastating strike from the alien's massive fist. Using all his remaining strength, he plunged the sword into the alien's neck. Grolt staggered, his eyes wide with shock. His hand reached for the wound, but it was too late. With a final roar of pain, the gladiator fell to the ground, his body crumpling like a broken puppet. The arena fell silent for a long moment. Then, like a wave crashing on the shore, the crowd erupted into applause. They couldn't believe what they had just seen. The human, the underdog, had won. Lord Varanth sat frozen in his seat, his face drained of color. The smug grin that had been there only moments before was gone. His jaw clenched as he stared at the human in the center of the arena, who now stood victorious, bloodied but alive. John had won. The human had defeated the mighty Grolt. Lady Zira stood quietly, her eyes fixed on John. The admiration she had felt earlier had grown into something deeper, something far more powerful. She had seen courage in humans before, but this was something different. The human was a true warrior, not just for his strength but for his heart. He had fought not just for his own survival but for something greater. Varanth's voice broke the silence, cold and filled with disbelief. "This cannot be. This should not be possible." But the truth was undeniable. The human had done what no one expected. He had won. And in doing so, he had proved something much bigger than just his personal victory. Lady Zira turned to her husband, her face unreadable. "You were wrong," she said quietly. Varanth's eyes flashed with anger. "What are you talking about? He's just a human. He's nothing compared to us." But Lady Zira didn't respond. She looked once more at John, standing tall in the center of the arena, victorious and alive. The cheers from the crowd grew louder, but Zira was no longer focused on the arena. She was focused on the human warrior who had defied the odds, and she knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. Something had changed in her, something that Varanth would never understand. As John raised his sword in triumph, the arena's applause echoed through the grand stadium. But in Lady Zira's heart, a new respect had been born for the human species. one that she would not soon forget. The arena was alive with excitement, the cheering still echoing in John's ears as he stood alone in the center, covered in sweat and blood. His victory was incredible, but for a moment the weight of it all hit him. The pain from his wounds surged through him and his vision blurred. He could barely stand. The rush of adrenaline that had carried him through the fight was beginning to fade, leaving him feeling dizzy and weak. But the crowd's cheers kept him standing. They weren't cheering just for a gladiator's win. They were cheering for something more. They were cheering for a human, a species many thought weak, fragile, and incapable of standing up to the powerful alien races that ruled the galaxy. John's breath came in short bursts, each one reminding him of the harsh reality of his situation. He had survived Grolt, but this was just the beginning. The bet that Lord Varanth had placed, his wife's freedom against the human's life, still loomed over him like a shadow. As the crowd's applause continued, John looked up at the royal box. There, sitting with a forced calmness, was Lord Varanth. The alien noble's face was pale, his expression twisted with a mix of disbelief and anger. His confident smile from earlier was gone. The look in his eyes was cold, calculating. It was the look of someone who had just lost everything. John's eyes then shifted to Lady Zira, standing beside her husband. She was watching him closely, her expression unreadable. But there was something in her gaze, a quiet understanding. He couldn't place it, but in that moment he knew she was different from the others. There was a spark of something more in her eyes. Varanth stood up abruptly, his voice cold and filled with fury. "This is a mistake," he muttered to himself, loud enough for those around him to hear. "This should not have happened." The nobleman's fury was barely controlled as he turned his gaze back toward John, who was still standing in the center of the arena, barely able to hold his sword. "No human should have defeated Grolt," Varanth spat. "This is impossible. I cannot lose." But as his words echoed through the arena, it became clear to everyone in the crowd that Varanth was not just angry at John. He was angry at himself. His arrogance, his belief in his own superiority had led him to make the foolish bet. Now he was paying the price. Lady Zira watched her husband closely. She had known Varanth for many years and she had seen him angry before. But this was different. There was fear in his eyes, something she had never seen in him. And she realized that it wasn't just fear of losing his bet. It was the fear of losing control. The fear that a human, someone he considered inferior, had bested one of the galaxy's greatest warriors. John, still exhausted from the battle, looked at Lady Zira. There was something about her that caught his attention. The way she carried herself, the way she seemed so calm in the face of the madness surrounding her. He had noticed it before, but now, in the heat of the moment, he saw something else. There was a quiet strength in her, a kind of wisdom that he had not expected from someone who lived among the elite of the galaxy. Lady Zira's gaze never wavered. She locked eyes with John, and for a brief moment, it felt as if the entire arena had faded away. There were no crowds, no betting, no gladiators. It was just the two of them, two beings from different worlds, yet connected in a strange way. Varanth, noticing the brief moment of connection between his wife and the human, scowled. "Enough of this nonsense," he muttered. He stepped forward, his voice loud and commanding. "The fight is over. The human is victorious, but that does not change the fact that he is still just a human, nothing more." Lady Zira's face remained calm, but a hint of anger flashed in her eyes. She had heard enough. For years, she had watched her husband treat others as though they were nothing more than tools to be used. Humans, in particular, had always been beneath him. But today, John had shown something that Varanth could never understand. He had shown the true spirit of humanity. The crowd, sensing the shift in the air, became quieter. It wasn't just about the fight anymore. There was something deeper unfolding. The human had not only defeated Grolt, but he had also defeated an idea that humans were weak, that they were inferior to the great alien species of the galaxy. John's chest heaved as he caught his breath, but he didn't look away from Lady Zira. He could feel the weight of her gaze, but it wasn't like the others. It wasn't filled with disdain or mockery. It was something else entirely. Suddenly, a loud voice boomed from the arena's announcer. "Lord Varinth's bed is void," the announcer declared, his voice carrying over the stunned silence of the crowd. "The human is the victor. The terms of the wager are now irrelevant." Varinth's eyes widened. "What?" he demanded. "That's impossible. I won't accept this." But the announcer continued, unflinching. "The human has earned his victory. His life is his own. And House Sillarth's bet, whether on a life or on a wife, no longer stands." The entire arena held its breath. Varinth, his face now a mask of fury and humiliation, looked as though he was about to explode. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on the announcer, but before he could speak, Lady Zira stood up. "I'll take the human side," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "He's won. He deserves more than just survival, he deserves respect." The crowd was silent, stunned by her words. Even Varinth seemed frozen, his rage turning into something else, something darker. "You can't be serious," he muttered. "I am," Lady Zira replied, her gaze still fixed on the human. "I've seen enough of your cruelty, Varinth. I've watched as you treated others as less than you. But today you've seen what true strength looks like. And it's not in size or power. It's in heart. It's in spirit. And that is something you will never understand." For a long moment Varinth stood there, his eyes wide with shock. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Then, with a single, defeated gesture, he turned away, storming out of the royal box. Lady Zira didn't look at her husband as he left. She was focused on John, who had now dropped to one knee, exhausted but alive. He had won not just the fight, but a kind of victory that went beyond the bloodshed of the arena. John looked up at her, still breathing heavily. "I didn't ask for this," he said quietly, "but I'm not going to run from it." Lady Zira smiled. "You don't have to. I'll stand with you." As the crowd began to chant his name again, John slowly rose to his feet. His victory was complete. The human, the underdog, had not only defeated the odds in the arena but had also changed the fate of his people. And standing beside him, Lady Zira knew that the universe had just shifted. The human spirit had triumphed. The arena had never been so quiet. The usual roars of victory, the chanting of names, and the excitement of battle had all faded into silence. In the midst of the echoing stillness stood John, the human warrior who had defied all odds. He had not only survived a battle against the legendary Grolt, but he had also captured the attention of the entire galaxy. The very thing that had been considered impossible had happened. One man had stood up against the mighty, and in doing so, had shaken the foundations of the universe's understanding of strength. Lady Zira stood beside him, her expression calm, but her eyes were full of something new, respect. She had seen the heart of humanity today. She had seen the resilience, the power, and the spirit that the human race carried within them. It was something that could never be measured in size, strength, or even raw power. It was something that went deeper. John's chest heaved as he finally caught his breath. His body ached, and the wounds from the battle still stung, but in that moment he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. He had proven them all wrong. He had done what no one thought possible, but there was more to come. The victory was not just about surviving the battle. It was about what happened next. What would Lord Varinth do now? What would the other noble houses think? And most importantly, what would Lady Zira do? John had already gained an unlikely ally in her, but what would that mean for him? The quietness in the arena was broken by the sudden movement of the royal box. Varinth had returned, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. He stormed into the center of the arena, his cloak swirling behind him like a dark storm. His eyes were wild, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked like a man who had lost everything, and in a way he had. "You have no right to do this," Varanth shouted, his voice echoing across the arena. "You, a human, have no right to stand there as if you are my equal. I have ruled over the strongest in the galaxy, and now I must bow to you." John stood his ground, his sword still gripped tightly in his hand, though he had no intention of using it. He was tired, exhausted, and his body screamed for rest, but he wasn't going to let Varanth intimidate him. Not now. "I didn't ask for your respect," John said, his voice steady and strong, "but I've earned it, and I'll earn more if it comes to that." Lady Zira stepped forward, placing a hand on John's shoulder. Her touch was gentle, but her words were firm. "Varanth, you've lost. Not just the bet, but the very idea of your superiority. The galaxy has seen what humanity is capable of. Your cruelty and arrogance cannot define us." Varanth's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. "And what will you do now, Zira?" he sneered. "Are you truly willing to stand by this human? Are you willing to defy everything I've worked for, everything I've built?" Zira didn't flinch. She had spent too many years pretending, too many years bowing to Varanth's whims. But now, for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of something inside her, a sense of freedom, of liberation. "I am," she said quietly, but her voice was filled with strength. "I am willing to stand with him, and in doing so I choose what's right over what's easy." Varanth's face turned pale with rage. His lips curled into a sneer as he tried to control his fury, but it was clear to everyone in the arena that he was losing his grip. His hand clenched at his side, and for a moment it seemed like he might lash out. But instead, he turned on his heel and stormed back toward the royal box. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the nobleman fled the arena, unable to face the truth that was now undeniable. Humanity had risen. And in doing so, they had shattered the illusion of superiority that had ruled the galaxy for so long. John watched him leave, his heart still pounding from the fight, but something was different now. The feeling of the arena, the weight of the bet, the years of humiliation, it all seemed like a distant memory. This was something more. This was the beginning of something bigger. Lady Zira turned back to John, her face softening. "You did it," she said simply. There was no need for further words. John had proven himself not just as a warrior but as a symbol of something more, something that would change everything. "I didn't do it alone," John replied. "You stood with me. That counts for something." Zira smiled. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. "Perhaps we can both learn something from this," she said. "Humans are not the only ones who can be underestimated." John couldn't help but grin. "I think we're both learning that lesson today." The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the atmosphere in the arena had shifted. The energy was different now. It was no longer a place of simple blood sport. It was a place where change had begun. And that change wasn't just about a single victory. It was about the future. As the dust settled, John and Zira made their way out of the arena together. The sky was beginning to darken, and the stars above twinkled like distant fires. For the first time since entering this strange and hostile world, John felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this galaxy was not as bleak as it seemed. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future where humanity could stand tall and be treated as equals. The path ahead was uncertain, and the road would be long, but John was no longer afraid of the challenges ahead. He had already faced the impossible and come out victorious. With Lady Zira by his side, he knew that anything was possible. The two of them walked into the night, side by side, the hum of the arena still ringing in their ears. They didn't know what would come next, but they knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning.